And as far as those deja vu moments, I think just because when you're around the game so much, you kind of know what works and what doesn't. You get the feeling of something's going wrong here and we have to fix that. And I was like Howie, he had Clare Drake. I had Bob Peters at Bemidgi, and he was incredible. He won 13 national championships. They had very similar coaching, and we even played U of A back in the day. We play the Canadian universities all the time. And, you know, and he was a one-liner guy, just didn't talk a whole lot about things, but it was all about, he made us run 10 miles before we were allowed on the ice. We weren't allowed on the ice till October. And that was kind of the theme all the time, was that guy you're playing against. He didn't run 10 miles. And then he had the brilliant idea the next year to go 20 miles, which was, nobody ran in those days. I'm talking 1968, 69. I just remember my inside of my legs being so chaffed because Bemidji's on a lake and it's really humid and you're running there and just raw from trying to, you guys are looking for shortcuts around the lake. Well, there is no shortcut because there's a lake there, but we're still looking because you're delirious. But that was the theme. He had this theme all the time. And that's what I remember. We played Lake Superior State in the national championship, but the week before, 3 of our players were playing on the U.S. national team, and they were over in Europe playing in the World Championships. And they beat us 2-1 without these guys, our 2 best defensemen and our top scorer. And they hadn't beat us forever. Ron Mason was their coach. And then the next game, they beat us 11-1. They just clobbered us. And we went back to Bemidji, and he didn't say one word about anything. And it's a really long drive. And our practices, we had 3 skates in every practice. He just stopped us, and for 10 minutes, we just skated. And sorry. But everyone knew that we didn't do what we do. So anyways, we go back and we're playing in the national championship in Sault Ste. Marie the next weekend, and they didn't get there for the first game, but we played another team and we won. We won that game, and the team wasn't near as good as Lake Superior State. And they got back at night after our game, and they arrived back. And we're playing in this Puller Stadium, and guys had effigies of these 3 players hanging, with a rope around their neck from the rafters in the stadium. And anyway, we won 7-2. And we always knew what we were about. And I think Howie does that. And I think they're really good coaches. Everybody knows what the team's about. And that's kind of my view on the whole thing.
Tom, your emotion showing through with the love you had for that coach and the influence he's had on you. And that's the kind of relationship I know that Clare has created in the culture with the Bears and Howie with the Pandas. I thought you were going to mention the run around the lake, and there was a player who never did it that was one of your better players.
Well, what happened is the first year there, I got there, and this one guy set a new scoring record. And we did that, around the lake, 10 miles. And this guy's buddies drive up, and they said, we'll drive you a few miles. So he jumped in the car, and they drove him a few miles, and I never saw him play. He's an all-time leading scorer. I never saw him play. He wasn't allowed. The coach did not allow him on the ice. And so it was pretty clear to everybody that you're either in or you're out.
And Howie, I wanted Tom to bring that up because I have a Clare Drake story. You can verify it for me. And it's okay if it's not totally true because I tell it every coaching clinic. Number one, I always say to the coaches, you haven't heard of Clare Drake, have you? All we talk about is John Wooden. And I hold Clare in such high esteem. And he's the only coach I know, and Sammy, I don't know if you know this, he has won 2 national championships in different sports in the same season. Back in the day, and he was assisting with the football team because back in the day, I believe you could play both and coach both. So he was an assistant. And apparently the head coach got sick. So Clare was invited to become the head coach. And the story I heard at the first practice or one of the early practices, and I see you nodding in agreement. Can you tell the story, Howie?
Well, I'm not sure exactly where you're going, but the story that I do know is that, and again, it speaks to Coach Drake's humility, is that and his willingness to admit. So part of humility is self-awareness. So he was very self-aware, and he knew where his strengths lied, and he knew where his weaknesses lied or his limitations, and he wasn't afraid to own either, right? And so he felt that it was important at the time for these young men to understand that he didn't know a lot. Like he said, I'm not necessarily a football guy. I'm not going to stand here and tell you guys that I know everything about the game of football, but I have people around me that I know are very good coaches and they know the game, and together we're going to create an experience for you that's great. So that's the story that I know, and the implication is that in so doing, they were able to see that he didn't necessarily need them to think that he was the great leader, just that he was, or the great man, right? He was just somebody who was going to do his best to help them be the best they can be in whatever way he could. And he was surrounding himself with the power of the others, like I talked about before, surrounding himself with great people. Yeah. Is that the same story?
Well, no, it's a more specific detail, but I understand that's the way he would do things. And I don't know if you heard this or not, and I don't know where I heard it, but at one of his early practices as a head coach, the star quarterback dropped an F-bomb. And he sent him off. And he talked to him after the game and says, we don't do things this way. It's not acceptable. And so the values approach of respecting yourself and being a quarterback and a leader, he really asserted the importance of values early in my mind. And that's the story that I took away from that, but I can understand how a lot of people don't walk the talk. And he walked the talk. And there's a lot of coaches that, they say the right things, but they don't do the right things. And Clare had an uncanny consistency to his approach for coaching. And I think that's what I tell out of that story. Have you heard that quarterback story, that specific incident, or was that before your time?
No, that would have certainly been before my time, but it doesn't surprise me at all. Coach Drake never swore, ever, and he never raised his voice. So he was absolutely. I can definitely see that.
The other thing that really impressed me, he and his wife hosted parties, socials, Christmases, and he paid special attention to players who weren't there or being included. He was so tuned in to everybody being a part of it. And I've heard those stories over time, and everything I've heard about Claire, I bring to coaching clinics. So I tell Clare Drake stories, and I've got more stories now, Howie Draper stories that are going to move forward. If